Welcome to The Know. I'm Ashley Jenkins.
I'm Mica Burton.
It's no secret that E3 is going to be kind of a make or break moment for Microsoft this generation. Not only are they fully unveiling Xbox Scorpio, their super-powered console, they're also faced with the task of enticing gamers with first-party exclusives.
Now, Microsoft is paying a bit more lip service to their need for the big exclusives ahead of E3, but gamers who love story-driven single-player titles might not be too excited for what they have to say.
Plus, they finally opened the curtain on one of this year's most talked about exclusives, and they're already having to do some damage control because players think so it looks a bit, well, rough on Phantom Dust. Oh, we hardly knew you.
Oh. But first, let's get to the comments the company has been making about their exclusive titles in 2017. In a recent interview with The Guardian, Xbox boss Phil Spencer talked about the company's need for games, and basically acknowledged the elephant in the room about their lack of exclusives compared to the PlayStation.
About first-party games, Spencer said, "I know I get some community pushback on our first-party slate and what position we're in, and I want to say to people that same level of commitment you felt from myself and from the team as we've evolved the platform over the last 3 years, as we've evolved service over the last 3 years, as we've evolved and innovated hardware over the last 3 years, is going on with our first party. I don't want to go and pre-announce a bunch of things, but we are upping our investment. There's no doubt about that."
Hopefully those pre-announcements are referring to games we'll be seeing at E3. At the moment, the only games we know we can expect from Microsoft are Crackdown 3, Sea of Thieves, State of Decay 2, and probably the next Forza entry, we hope.
Proper. Still, those franchises may not be enough to excite a lot of gamers any longer, especially when you consider the success we've seen this year already from new IPs. So who knows, maybe they're sitting on something we haven't heard of before that they'll announce at the show, and it will be crazy, and it will be big, and it will be amazing. That's the dream, right?
But unfortunately, it seems like if those new games are coming, they're probably not going to be story-driven, single-player titles, if some of Spencer's other comments are to be believed.
Later in the same Guardian interview, Spencer went into talk about story-driven single-player games and pushed back on whether or not those games make as much money as people actually think they do.
Spencer said, "The audience for those big story-driven games, I won't say it's as large, but they're not as consistent. You'll have things like Zelda or Horizon Zero Dawn that'll come out, and they'll do really well, but they don't have the same impact that they used to have, because the big service-based games are capturing such a large amount of the audience. Sony's first-party studios do a lot of these games, and they're good at them, but outside of that, it's difficult. They become more rare. It's a difficult business decision for those teams."
So, doesn't sound too promising if you're hoping for those kinds of experiences from Xbox. Also, actually kind of lends credence to a lot of what we heard about the cancellation of Scalebound, that it was intended to be a very single-player experience. Sure, a couple, like some co-op, some multiplayer integration, but overall it was going to be a single-player story-based campaign, and then Microsoft wanted them to add more multiplayer and make it more of a service-based type game, and that was one of the big issues between Microsoft and Platinum, and that's what led to Scalebound being canceled. Obviously nothing firm there, but those two philosophies do seem to be tying together. And it's interesting that Spencer is even really saying that, because the examples he listed show that single-player titles still have plenty of gas in the tank. Both Horizon Zero Dawn and Breath of the Wild sold like crazy in 2017 already, with Horizon moving 2.6 million in its first 2 weeks as a new IP, no less, and Zelda selling 2.7 million in its first 3 weeks.
Although, if you look at Microsoft's most recent exclusives or timed exclusives that were story-driven, like Rise of the Tomb Raider and Quantum Break, there's a little bit more basis for that assumption, as neither of those games sold particularly well on Xbox One.
But it's not single-player games, it's just those single-player games
those
didn't do quite so well. But Spencer does kind of have a point that the big money is in titles that function more like a service or a platform rather than a single-player experience that you devour, you play through it, and then you're finished with. The best-selling titles of 2017 so far actually belong to Ubisoft, who crushed records with both Ghost Recon and For Honor, two games that exist as money-making multiplayer machines. You know, neither of which had the sheer hype that something like Zelda or Horizon had, but still sold like crazy, and they're multiplayer games, so people are still playing them.
With microtransactions, yay! So for better or worse, it sounds like Microsoft is committed to the same kind of titles in the future, or games where they can build a platform. Things like Minecraft, Sea of Thieves, or even the platforms they've built inside properties like Halo 5 and Gears of War 4.
But hey, they've got at least one single-player-ish title coming in 2017. Everyone's been waiting for it. Phantom Dust, the Xbox remake Microsoft's been talking about for the last several years, finally got its gameplay reveal this week.
If you're a bit confused about what the heck this Phantom Dust game is and why you should care about it, no one could blame you. The Phantom Dust reboot was first announced in 2014, but then was later canceled by Microsoft. Then last year they said at E3 Phantom Dust would still return, albeit in the form of a remastered version of the original Xbox game due for Xbox One and PC this year.
Unfortunately, it's been touted as one of their special exclusives for 2017, and Polygon's special 19-minute first look at the action strategy CCG shows that it's pretty much just the original game blown up to 4K, which, to be fair, isn't much different than what Microsoft had said we should expect all along, but it is a little bit jarring to see one of their most talked about titles of 2017 looking, well, kind of so rough and outdated right from the get-go.
Yeah, and on top of all that, it's going to be adding paid DLC and microtransactions.
Oh boy, my favorite new features.
So you can spend money on new decks if you don't want to grind. Gamers just love those microtransactions, am I right?
Well, you can't just have those single-player games. They don't make money.
No.
The rough first look at the game has elicited quite the response from gamers already, with dozens of negative posts on NeoGAF, which, normally isn't very newsworthy, but Microsoft Studios creative director Adam Isgreen has jumped in to do some damage control already to try to set the record straight. And this just came out today.
In a NeoGAF thread trashing Phantom Dust gameplay, Isgreen responded to concerns about the game's 30 FPS frame rate, its outdated visuals, the addition of microtransactions, and why it's literally using the original assets instead of, remastering them.
According to Isgreen, Phantom Dust should be considered a re-release rather than a remaster. He says that it's mostly because the developers no longer have access to the game's original source code, which kept them from making any significant changes, like better access and a 60 FPS frame rate. That was actually one of the big things. So one of my favorite game franchises of all time is Homeworld. And Gearbox, bless their hearts, one of the bright points at Gearbox for me is that they bought the IP, they bought those games, and they remastered them with one exception. And that was Homeworld Cataclysm, which they couldn't do because there are no copies of that development anymore. They're like any source code is just gone. There's nothing they could do with it. Like if you get a compiled version, you're kind of boned. So if you don't have the source code for the original Phantom Dust, you can't modify it. So that sucks.
That does suck. So basically one of their most talked about exclusives of 2017 is just an original Xbox game with some very basic improvements.
Upscaling.
Just upscaling, no new assets or graphics, plus a new way to charge gamers for microtransactions. Neat.
Well, I guess they could modify it at least that much. About the game's outdated visuals, Isgreen said, "Yep, it's a game from 2003. We preserved its look, but really you shouldn't be hung up on looks here because this is a player's game, not a looker's game."
Hoy Bowdy! That's a ringing endorsement right there. From there, Isgreen went on to say, sometimes, well, okay, often, we make games to make money, but this re-release isn't focused on that. It's about recognizing something unique and novel and allowing more people to discover it.
Well, good luck with that, Microsoft. What do you guys think about Microsoft's recent comments about shying away from single-player stories, plus the, so far, bad reception to the Phantom Dust re-release? Let us know in the comments.
For future updates on Microsoft's first-party efforts and more games that aren't there for you to look at, just, for you to play, remember to like this video and subscribe to The Know.
I mean, look, I get it, like, graphics aren't everything, but there's something. They're not everything, but there's something.
My favorite part is, we don't always make games for money. Okay, we do, but not this time. Not this time with the microtransactions. It's not for money.